Jonathan, just tell us what, in your words, describe the story to us. Give us the elevator pitch for Batshit Bride.
Okay. Every time I produce something, I usually memorize a log line for it anyway, so this is good. It's about a bride who, on April Fool's Day, just days before her wedding, pranks her fiance by saying that she thinks that they've lost that spark and they should call off the wedding and break up, only to find out that he feels the exact same way. His response is, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you said it first. I feel exactly the same." And she's like, "Wait, what?" And everything spirals out of control. She endeavors to keep the wedding from falling apart, in a lot like Meet the Parents, where like nothing could go right for Ben Stiller. His character, nothing can go wrong for the bride in this, or nothing can go right for the bride in this film. After that prank gone horrendously awry, everything else just spirals out of control, and in the end, the lead character, the bride, she ultimately learns a lesson and is a better person by the end after this
What is the
very
theme
stressful.
or the themes that you were eager to explore in this film, and where did the idea come from?
Okay, certainly, yeah. Let me start with where the idea came from. I actually thought of the idea in college, like near the end of college, and honestly, I just thought of that inciting incident, the prank gone awry, and I remember I thought of it at the end of college, the idea, and then I graduated, and I shortly after that wrote the first draft of the script. And the first draft of the script was just, in retrospect, terrible. One, it was from the male's perspective. He was the one who pranked the bride. His name was Joe King, which is just about the worst college level writing you can possibly think of. Uh, but I remember, like, it was still kind of funny. Maybe I rewrote a draft after that, and then I put it away for a few years, and then I pulled it out of the proverbial drawer a few years later and worked on it some more. I can't remember exactly when, but it switched to the female being the main character. If only because traditionally weddings are a little bit more higher stakes for the female than they are for the male. The groom is just dressing in many traditional weddings, and so. But yeah, like the emotional stakes were typically for the bride. So it seemed like a good switch. That happened, I don't know, mid the number of drafts, whatever the number of drafts that I wrote. Put it away again. In the meantime, I was making two other feature films, working on some other things. And then after my second film, I was like itching to. Once I finish one film, after it's kind of out there distributed and work on it kind of dwindles and diminishes and disappears eventually, I feel the itch to make another one. And so I pulled this one out of the drawer again and rewrote it a little bit more, and then went off and made it. And I'm sure you'll ask questions about how I made it, so I'll save that for later. But insofar, the themes and stuff I wanted to explore, I mean, at the end of the day, and I know I said this in the press notes, is I just wanted to make a film that was fun and just a fun comedic piece of confection that will make you happy for an hour and a half, and then and you're like, thank you for that entertainment by the end. Particularly because my second film was a little bit more dour and heavy, and after that, I just wanted to do something, like I said, more fun. There's a little bit of satire in there, just a little bit, just a touch, a little spice. That is, some satire of the wedding industrial complex as it is these days. Like, there's that one line about the groom kind of hits the bride with that one heavy hitting line where he's like, "You don't want to marry me, you just want the Facebook photos." Um, and so there's
Yeah,
like a little, yeah, and so which is something that I have observed in real life, where like it seems like weddings these days. I know that most weddings are absolutely for the love, but there's a little bit of excessive joy in being able to post your wedding photos and maybe make people a little bit
and
jealous. Uh, I want,
as much pride as men have when they get married. I mean, they're the ones who are on the knees with the ring, whether the ring is a $3,000 beautiful work of art or whether it's a little improvised. What was it? A copper half emerald thing that you had in worst year of my life.
yes,
Yeah, whatever the ring is, the man has a certain amount of pride, but the film does seem to acknowledge that it is a bigger deal for women. That women really want to get married, whether it's to a man or to a woman. there is something about the ceremony. There is something about that ritual that seems to have a heightened importance for women. That seems to come through in Batshit Bride, as it does in a lot of other films. Do you think that's true?
In real life, I mean, no, every individual is completely different. I know that if and when I marry, I just want to go to a courthouse, and I know, other women I've dated who would feel the exact same. I know everybody is a unique individual, and however they feel about the institution, they feel about the institution. And I think every feeling is correct. It's funny because, I did obviously in this film, it's a wedding film, and there's a ton of wedding films that have preceded it, countless wedding films that have preceded it. So maybe to answer your question, I will say that like one of my active efforts just broadly with the film was to remember and know every wedding film that I've ever seen, all the tropes and traditional things, and decide, some things to stick with, but pretty much every step of the way to try to do what was unexpected at any particular moment. Whether or not I failed, that'll be up for other people to decide. But one thing I definitely did, obviously leave in there is that the wedding is typically, the higher stakes, more higher stakes event for the female. And if there's any, this isn't my own personal belief or my own beliefs of how society is, or the battle of the sexes or anything. Admittedly, when I had the first draft, which centered around the guy, and then the later drafts that centered around the girl, the drafts with the girl worked much better. So, regardless of however, people traditionally feel about the institution, or what I think, I went in a direction that worked best for the story, which is always my thing. For any film that I make, is I just try to decide all the details and elements in a way that just best serves what's the premise and how best can I play it. And so, all the details, at least in the film as you see it now, are the best that I could think of at the time when I was writing it to play this idea as best as possible.
Okay, now it's obviously a low budget film. I'll get onto that in just a second, but
Yeah.
the feel of the premise, it actually, if you were to describe it to somebody, it actually sounds a lot like a 1990s Julia Roberts movie.
Absolutely.
Yep, go on.
Oh, no. Finish your question, then I'll answer.
Well, I'm going to stop the question there and then follow up with another question. But I want to just your response to the commercial feel of the film. It sounds like you are a fan of rom-coms, of big commercial films.
So yes, one, I am a huge fan of romantic comedies, which is always surprises all my friends who know me as just horribly, horribly cynical. And then they're always just amazed that I write mostly romantic comedies. And I love them. I think they're fantastic. One of my top three favorite films of all time is Annie Hall. When Harry Met Sally is up there. Movies like Clueless, I think, are just perfect. Like Meg Ryan in her heyday was just the most adorable thing you've ever seen. Even like high school films like Can't Hardly Wait, which is a flawed film, but just a fantastic high school film. I love them. I love them all. Insofar as the commercial aspect, that was conscious. That was something I wanted to do. My first film, and I think you ended up watching all
Yes,
three of my.
yes.
Okay. So my first one was a straight up comedy, pretty much for laughs. Some sweetness here and there, and with a titillating title. I made that one to try to be marketable and get some attention. My second film was obviously a dramedy and a little bit more artistically bent. I mean, there's still silly comedy in there for sure. But it's funny because after that one, I remember after The Worst Year of My Life, when I finished the first cut of the film in the editing room, that film was funny because we had the actors and I and the crew, we had so much fun shooting the film, just a million laughs. And then I finished the first cut of the film and I was like, geez, this is way more sad and serious than I expected it to be. And I think, and which is great. I'm super proud of that film and a lot of things that I did in it. But after it was released, and I knew even before when I was writing the script and casting it with actors who I thought would be great, but who weren't naming people, I was like, this is an uphill battle to sell. This is not as marketable as my first film is. I know it's not going to earn as much money, which it didn't, which I was fine with because I expected that from day one. So this time around, I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to make something a little bit more marketable than that. So that was a conscious effort. And I already had this thing in the drawer, like I said, which I liked, and it's a wedding comedy. I think people like bright, fun wedding comedies. And I think that they're sellable. So, like I will readily admit that, commercial viability was a consideration, but not shameful. I embraced it. I was happy to do it. And like, it was a super fun film it wasn't a fun film to make. It was a fun film to edit and put together, and it's been fun to promote.
We can get into it in a second, but yes, my basic question that I'd like to ask is, and I do often ask this, or I certainly often think that inside every independent filmmaker is a commercial filmmaker just waiting for that phone call from a studio saying, yes, we want to be in business with you. Is that the case with you?
Oh, absolutely. I will shamelessly admit that. Absolutely. Like, this was one where I definitely made it hoping that, like, again, like, I love the project. There's a reason I continued to work on it for years and years since I left college, which is because I love the project. But I also totally made it with the thought of just like, hey, somebody give me a lot more money to make something even bigger than this. After seeing this film, I totally shamelessly admit to that.
That's fine. That's nothing to be ashamed of. So essentially, the film, you would like it to work as a calling card to any suits out there in the studios. You might see this and go, you know what, if we remade this film with stars and with a budget that was more than $12.75, we could actually have a hit and maybe change the title.
Yeah. And again, like, a large part of that title is, there's actually a very simple reason why that title stuck, because we considered a number of titles, but a big part of it is that, in today's modern society where content is almost infinite, some sort of title that grabs your attention is a bonus and helpful, even if it pisses some people off at first glance. But plenty of people will be like, all right, Batshit Bride, yeah, click, let's see what this is about, and hopefully they watch it. But yeah, like, I would, the film is definitely a calling card. I mean, I make all my films to be a calling card for presumably the next one. But this one was very much calling cardish, and again, shamelessly so. But it didn't mean that I don't think it meant. I mean, you're a critic, you watched it and you felt a certain way, but I don't feel like I didn't make the film to pander in any way. I was still trying to be me and deny expectation at every turn possible, while embracing a few things here and there.
I have a thing when I talk to independent film directors, mainly in Australia, because we have a very rich culture here of independent filmmaking. And one of the things I like to submit them to, usually towards the end of the interview, but I'm going to hit you with this now, is what I call the Shembri Challenge. And that's this, that, okay, I'm a studio head. I've seen your funny little movie about weddings. I'd like you to remake it with a $50 million budget and your selection of these A to B list actors. We want you to basically remake the film, but Jonathan, we want you to change it so that the wedding between the two mains is the climax of the film. So we want you to shift all that post-wedding action to before it. We want you to really sort of restructure it so that the climax of the film is the couple getting together. What would you say to that as a deal?
I'd happily say yes to that. It was funny. I was worried that you were going to ask me, now, how do you do that? And I'd be like, I'd need at least like 20 minutes to think of something. But I'd happily do that. Especially because here's what I'll say. And because I work in the studio system, I work at Blue Sky Studios, and I am a Disney employee. So I know the studio system. And I know that people like to complain about the studio system, and rightly so. But But the other thing that I know just from years and years of independent filmmaking, and I feel like studio directors would benefit from knowing this, is that the one of the phrases I live by is every obstacle is actually an opportunity. Um, so, like what you just said there, I'd be like, great, all right, cool. If that's the stipulation, I will readily accept, even though I don't know the answer. And I'd be stoked to figure out a way to do it differently. And if anything, I actually would thank you, because I wouldn't want to make the exact same film twice. So that would be a way to do it differently anyway. So I don't know. I don't even think it's a test. I think what you just said is a blessing.
You do work in the industry, as you say. You got a credit for Ice Age, one of the Ice Age films. Can you just, in a nutshell, just tell us what you do for a living in the film world, in the big commercial studio film world?
Yeah, so I work at Blue Sky Studios. I work in development. So my credits that you see on some of these films are a little bit like dummy credits, because development, we're not part of production, but still they credit everybody at the studio. So those credits that you see are just kind of like weird and don't always reflect the act, if I even worked on the film that much. Actually, like the most accurate credit is my recent one, because they just finally credited our department as development, and that was it, which is good, because I didn't even really work on on our new film, although I was the one that suggested the title for it, that was picked. So if you like it or not, you can blame me or credit me. But yeah, I mean, I work in development at Blue Sky Studios, and one of my favorite tasks there, that I'm in charge of, is employees are allowed to pitch at the studio, and so I am the first gateway. They'll come to me with their ideas, and I help them to develop them into a pitch. And that's very rewarding. And it's led to, and what's funny is that it's led to a lot of good things from pitches that the studio declined. For instance, one buddy of mine at work, he thought of, I think, a hilarious feature, and I come from the world of comedy, and this was very much like what he thought of it was very much like an Airplane or a Zucker Brothers type animated comedy. And I was like, after it wasn't picked up, I was like, dude, you and I work on this, because I think this is great. And so he and I have been developing it. And it was funny. We started writing a feature, and we finished the first act, and table read it. And the resounding note from the table read was, you know what, this would be a great television show. And we're like, oh my gosh, yes, it would. So now, like, all of that has led to me working on this television show with this buddy of mine. Another pitch that wasn't picked up has led to me, like, I'm directing an animated short with a buddy of mine at work. He thought of the idea, and I developed it with him. So that's actually been like the most rewarding part of the job. Again, it's the studio system, so it can be very frustrating when you see certain ideas that are good just be discarded, and then and it's just sad, because you knew it was going to be an idea that was going to lead to maybe a great film, but so it goes.
So, tell us about the making of this film. I want to know how much it actually did cost. I want to know how much you paid your cast, and I want to know how many favors you pulled in.
Okay. How long do you have on the favors line? I will. Okay. So let's see. How best to answer? Well, first, I will always say that whenever I tell people how much my films cost, I usually say just what I shot the film on. The reason is because post-production is just always like I still pay for things on my first film and my second film, even though they've been released for a long time. At the very least, I'm renewing the domain renewal for the website every year. So because theoretically post-production expenses are just infinite, I always say what I shot a film on. And the other reason I say it is because there is a certain world where you could stop spending money on the film after you shoot it, if you edit in Adobe Premiere Pro and color correct yourself and sound mix yourself and all that stuff. So Batch Bride, I shot for under $40,000, which I think is, and in 2 weeks, with one day that was a break. I think both of those facts are insane, especially you saw the film and there's one wedding scene with like 100 extras in it, which was a miracle that they showed up. That's a whole story unto itself. And we shot it, kind of like in maybe 5 or 6 towns along I-95 in Connecticut. So there were like location moves, 2 or 3 of them within a day, with like, dozens and dozens of speaking parts. It was a crazy shoot, and it actually broke my back. It was not very enjoyable for me at all.
Okay. And what's the deal you had with the cast and crew? Did you pay them on deferment?
Yeah. So I have to answer by dividing the cast and crew a little bit. So when I cast the film, I come out of the comedy scene in Los Angeles. I was a writer performer there at places like UCB, Improv Olympic or IO. At a ton of indie shows, other theaters. I can't even remember them all now. And so I befriended a ton of very, very funny people who I think are very intelligent and very talented. So when I was casting the film, the leads, I did cast 3 people from Los Angeles, Meghan Falcone, Josh Kovit, Johnny Schwartzbein. And I've known all of them for years and years and years from my time in Los Angeles, improvising. I was probably in a group with Meghan at some point, and I know I was in many groups with Josh Kovit. And Johnny Schwartzbein and I are just, dear, dear friends. Like he's one of my best friends in the world. And we actually ran an improv comedy show together for years and years. So I cast them. And Meghan, who is like the most successful of all of them, no offense, Josh and Johnny, her agent, I properly dealt with her agent and everything. And I paid her a certain amount. I probably shouldn't say, but I paid her a certain amount. And then I paid, and Josh and Johnny are contracted to be paid a certain amount too. They've kindly, and I've delivered some of it. The film will start to generate revenue soon, which is great because then I'll be able to deliver the rest of it. Some of these things I can't quite say because they're deals, of course. And then I flew them all out here and, paid for their lodging and stuff like that. But then, and one of the bridesmaids was also a Los Angeles person who, she was in a film called Gone Daddy Gone. I knew those filmmakers. I liked her in it, so I cast her in it. But the rest were all local actors, and they are all, they all agreed to deferred pay, which was extremely helpful. Like I reimbursed them on their travel because so many of them came from New York City and we were shooting Connecticut. So they would take, and God bless them, because this is where all the favors start. And I will say this, literally every cast member that you see in the film, by being in the film, was doing me a favor. So just everybody who's listed in the cast, that's a ton of people who were doing me a favor. People would come from New York on like 5 a.m. trains and do their scenes and then go back on late trains. And I know you wanted to, I think I answered your cast payment question and all that stuff. And I think the question after that was the favors question, which I will answer. Just by rattling off as many as I can think of. The biggest one I would say was the Inn at Longshore, where we shot the film. The woman there, her name's Christine, she was fantastic and allowed me to shoot there for very, very little. Like the Inn at Longshore is like a place where real weddings, you pay, I'm only guessing, I don't know the exact sums, but I'm sure it's like one of those places where you pay $25,000, $50,000 just to rent the venue on a Saturday night. She let me shoot there for absolutely a fraction, a very small fraction of, those numbers I just mentioned. And so that alone, it was a huge favor. And the way that we worked it out was I went and I met with her. And we talked for like an hour and a half, got along great. And by the end of the meeting, she was like, I'm gonna let you shoot here. And we worked out a deal, which was, I mentioned that we shot the film over 2 weeks. For those 2 weeks, on the Mondays through Wednesdays of each week, we shot at the Inn at Longshore. On the 2 Mondays, we could shoot in the ballroom because nothing was happening in the ballroom on the Mondays. And on the Tuesdays and Wednesdays of each week, we could shoot around the grounds. And the grounds there were beautiful. The Inn at Longshore itself is beautiful, and then it's surrounded by like a really great golf course. There's like a sort of like a marine center there where you can like rent kayaks and paddle boards and stuff like that. There's like tennis nearby, wonderful back patio area with a restaurant, an adjoining restaurant. So like the grounds were just fantastic. And I actually rewrote a lot of scenes to fit the grounds. Like there's a running gag where the bride, Heather, is just good at everything. she tries because she's so type A. So she's just kind of almost like magically good at everything. So I rewrote some scenes, like involving golf and paddleboarding, kayaking, that kind of played on that joke. One funny story though was that was my agreement with Christine to shoot around the Net Longshore. And it's a private property, so we were shooting there with her permission. And then I think it was the very last scene that we were shooting at the Net Longshore on the grounds there. So it was the second Wednesday. We were shooting like literally the last shot, and a representative from the town of Westport, Connecticut, walked up to us, and she goes, "Do you guys have a permit to shoot here?" And we're like, "Oh no, it's fine. Like the Net Longshore said that we could shoot on the property." And they're like, and she goes, "Oh no, the Inlet Longshore does not actually own this property." And we realized I'll just say that was the day where we realized the actual borders of the Inlet Longshore. We had definitely extended beyond them, and we were like, "Oh my gosh, well, can we just shoot this final shot?" She's like, "Fine, just do it really fast." We shot it really fast, packed up, and took off, and did not return to shoot anything else after that. So there you go. Other favors, I mean, the churches where we shot were massive. Like just the people who run the churches, they did us a massive favor by letting us shoot there for cheap or even free. People who lent us all kinds of props, like one kid is in a wheelchair, somebody lent us that. This was an amazing favor. There is that golf scene where Heather's chipping balls, onto the green, and I had borrowed some clubs from somebody at Blue Sky Studios, but I did not have a chipper. So I was like, all right, well, we'll just fake a putter, see if like we can get away with it. And to me, it wasn't looking too good. I was like, God, that looks like a putter. And then some guy was like, he walked up after finishing a round of golf. He's like, "You guys shooting a movie?" I'm like, "Yeah. Hey, can we borrow your chipper?" I asked shamelessly right to his face. And all the actors and the crew were just like, "Oh my God, what an asshole." And the guy's like, "Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can borrow my chipper. But you have it for like 20 minutes because I'm about to leave." So I was like, "Okay, we'll get it really fast." And we shot her chipping some balls. And then the guy drove by and I handed him the chipper through his window and he took off. And that was like the most random, miraculous favor. And fortunately, it looks like she's using a chipper instead of a putter in the scene because of it. So, I mean, that's just a bunch of other favors. One thing maybe to answer the question, and I'll shut up in a second so you can ask another question.
No problem.
Blue Sky Studios, so many people at the studio helped direct me towards resources in ways that were just kind of miraculous. We have at Blue Sky Studios just like a general email alias for pretty much everybody on the studio's on it unless you unsubscribe. And people ask all kinds of crazy questions. They're like, where's the best place for renter's insurance? Or I need to find a good daycare. And so I started going on there asking all kinds of like bizarre questions, like, so does anybody know of like a jail where I could maybe film? And I was like, no one's going to answer this. And sure enough, people would answer like, oh, there's actually a drunk tank in the basement of the Stanford Old Town Hall. You should go check it out. So I did. And that location worked out. And then coincidentally, there was a courthouse there and I needed a courthouse. So I ended up shooting 2 scenes there. And that was just amazing. And I probably couldn't even count the number of just random questions I asked to the studio at Blue Sky Studios, and people would reply usually really quickly, and it will always amaze me with like answers to like my most random, esoteric, weird, bizarre questions. And so there, like a lot of this film, it was chaotic, but it was a confluence of just like a lot of miraculous events helping it to happen. A lot of favors, a lot of wonderful coincidences. Just like a lot of just random blessings that helped everything that is on the screen for so little money appear on the screen.
You mentioned it's a mix. It's a confluence of happenstance, and it's a bit chaotic. And I imagine you produce as much as you can, but you obviously you're working on a very tight schedule, and I imagine that your script, which you write, is absolutely, you've got all the air bubbles squeezed out of it, that it is as tight as it can be because you don't have a lot of time to play with. Is that the situation when you go into making a film like this?
Absolutely, for me. It's funny, like I guess you could say that it's ironic. I come from, I started improv comedy in college and I continued it in Los Angeles, and I'm actually like reviving it now a little bit in my life. But I absolutely love and adore improv comedy. The first time I saw it, I was drawn to it just one because it looks like it was just plain fun, and that's why and it is, and that's why improv comedy will always be just an end to me. It was not like it is for so many actors, like it's a means to find an agent or something like that. For me, it's an end. I just love it unto itself. But I did also recognize how much, and I think other people hopefully recognize this, how much it applies to writing and filmmaking, but particularly writing. I was drawn to it, I know, also for that reason, and I was so glad that I studied it for so long because I feel like it helped my writing. Here's what's the ironic thing about it, though, is that like because I was such an avid improv comedian and it's so much a part of my artistic development, I'm actually, I don't want to say anti-improv, but improv is not part of my film sets in the least. And I think that would surprise probably like any of my friends who know me from the comedy world. And there's a few reasons for that. One, all my films have been shot on very, very tight schedules. So there's really not a lot of room for it, just practically speaking. Another reason is, like I'm not Martin Scorsese or anything like that with with my amount of camera movement, but I do, regard the camera as another player in the scene and another element that is choreographed and blocked just as much as the actors are. And so, and it's certainly true in Batsh Bride. There's a few like oneers in there that are, pretty intricately blocked. And the camera's moving around and like we're all, the actors in the camera, we're all hitting timing and everything like that. And so, improv would just kind of like mess up something like that. So there's that. And then the other reason is improv for me, I'll say two more reasons. Improv for me, like influenced and helped my writing so much. But then, like when I write a screenplay, like you said, I'm a huge structure hound, like massive structure hound. And so like when I write something, I rewrite it. I do think Batsh Bride was like, I rewrote like 14, 15 drafts, something like that. And I remember like around what draft, like maybe it was around draft 10 or 12 where like 10, 11 or 12 where the structure was like, oh, this is it. This is a solid structure. This is the final structure for me. And, after you spend so much time, searching and for and grappling with the perfect structure, when you feel that you've achieved it, I don't want to, I'm proud of that. And I feel like, improv would maybe just start to bloat some of that. And that will lead me into my next point, which is, I do also watch a lot of films. I love Judd Apatow. I've enjoyed so many of his films thoroughly, but at the same time, every time I watch one of his films, I'm always like, that was a great movie, but 20 minutes too long. And I feel like every time there's 20 minutes, it's always like some scene that I know they improvised on set and they were just dying laughing on set at this scene. But then when they actually cut it, like they still laugh and laugh and laugh at it because they remember, how much they were laughing when they were shooting it, when they were there. But then like when you actually show the film to somebody, the scene that I know it was so funny for you on set and also still funny for you in the editing room, but I'm like, I don't know, it's just kind of dead weight on your film. So that's another one of my reasons that I don't always improvise on set. At the same, but when I say that, I mean like just like making up a scene, like let's just set up a couple cameras and go. That does not mean that I'm in any way against like rewriting on set or changing a line or something like that, which happened plenty on Batsh Bride, especially like Meghan, who would like I remember specifically like one. Oh, and also Meghan Falcone is like no offense to all the other actors I've ever worked with, but she is just maybe the most professional actress I've ever worked with in my life. Because, and here's the reason why. She has a very dialogue-heavy character who is in just about every scene of the film and motor-mouthing most of her dialogue. And she did not miss a single beat. She barely ever stumbled over anything she ever said. I did not have to reshoot because of her delivering dialogue. She was on point from day one until the last day, and it was just amazing because it is like a motor mouth, His Girl Friday type performance. But she would, like on set, she'd be like, oh man, this line's kind of a tongue twister. Can we say it this way? And I'd be like, yeah, absolutely. And then we'd shoot it that way 2 seconds later. So absolutely room for that. I'm just kind of like, I'm not going to shoot up. I'm never going to set up a camera and just say like, I improvise. And now I'm going to backtrack and say, actually, the the bachelorette party, I let the cinematographer direct that, and they just did kind of improvise in the limousine while they were driving, and I was behind them, and I was like, I hope that footage was good. I'll see you in the editing room. So that does happen. All right.
Yeah, no,
All right.
improvisation, especially in comedy, has its place, but I think that place, as you said, is with directors who have got enough time, money, and camera gear to just shoot, shoot, shoot. I really take note of what you said about Judd Apatow. I too
Mm-hmm.
am a huge fan, but like
Mm-hmm.
the rest of the world's population, feel that a lot of his films are about 20 minutes too long. And of course, when you get the DVDs of these films, you go to the bonus material, there they are, all the stuff that they left out, where they're just improvising. And what they do is that they cut in the funniest stuff. They just say, well, just improvise. We got the camera rolling, don't worry. It's all bought and paid for. Just come out with the best lines you can, and we'll use the one or two best lines from the 40 or 50 that you spouted. So perhaps, Jonathan, this is a luxury you will be able to indulge once you hit the big time.
Exactly. You know, I readily confess that I might eat crow, and like 2 or 3 films from now, I'm just like, yeah, improvise it. It's great. Improvising is the best thing to do on a film. So, you know, who knows? But I do agree, at least with you right now, that it has its place. Because, like I said, I did immediately need to backtrack once I finished everything that I just said and say like, oh yeah, the bachelorette party scene, like all the stuff in the limousine, most of it was scripted, and they hit the scripted stuff, but then they improvised a bunch of stuff. And even on The Worst Year of My Life, although it was a dramatic scene when Kyle is like roaming around his apartment after he's discovered this betrayal from his girlfriend, hitting the walls and, you know, just kind of like breaking down. That one, I just left the room and I was like, you and my cinematographer, you guys do this. I'll see the footage later. So, you know, like you said, there are places, and I'll do it if I'm like, yeah, you know, like whatever you give me, I know is going to work.
Because you are such a structure nut, and that is very noticeable in all your films, even Breast Picture. Maybe it
Yes.
moved a bit too quickly, but you were only able to do that because you had such a great structure in place. And they are structured 3 acts, like big commercial films, and so that's one of the enjoyable things about your films, Jonathan, that you do have that structure in mind. But because you have a structure, you know the space where you can improvise, or you can say to a cinematographer, go ahead and shoot it, because if it's great, it's got a set place where it can go. If it's not so great, then the structure will take care of that. It'll be maybe 30 seconds instead of 2 minutes.
That's absolutely true. And actually, I think the most criminal thing is improvising when there is no structure to the story. When you have an absolute structure, that's when improv works, because, you know, you're working within limitations. And what you just described is pretty much Curb Your Enthusiasm. And that's why those shows work so well. Like Larry David is a genius because he knows like, all right, I need to script these as tightly as he probably scripted his Seinfeld episodes, where, you know, there's, you know, I know like sitcoms are typically A plot, B plot, C plot. But like, you know, he would in Curb Your Enthusiasm, and usually it follows the same thing: A plot, B plot, C plot. I actually watched an episode today. I know that he like structures. Yeah, I know. It's a good thing I watched one in preparation for this interview. I didn't even realize I was preparing.
Guess
I
what
thought
I
it
was
just,
doing last night for 2 hours?
yeah, I thought I was being lazy, but no, I was preparing. It was homework. But like, you can just tell that like when you watch those episodes, he absolutely thought of like the A plot, B plot, C plot, structured them perfectly so that they, you know, they start at a grounded level and then they heighten and explore, and they're a little bit more absurd with every beat, and then in the end they intertwine beautifully, like what typically happens. I mean, that's basically the sitcom structure for most sitcoms. Uh, and they do that, and I'm sure that he could just describe those things, like just pitching them, and they'd be hilarious. And because he's structured them so well and the outline is so great, he knows that like, well, all right, as long as we show up and we hit certain beats in these scenes, we can just kind of like shoot it 2 or 3 times with different dialogue that we improvise every time, and it'll work out just great. And it does work out great because I actually, maybe that is the weird irony, is that like the best place to improvise is within a really tight structure.
We're very, very proud of the independent film culture we have in this country. I
Yeah.
think some of the independent films that we make are among the best in the world. Absolutely great art house films. We do have a lot of government funding, a lot of government support for filmmaking in general, and certainly for independent filmmakers. Can you, Jonathan Smith, tell me, as an American independent filmmaker, what access you have to government finance for your films?
So I'll answer that 2 ways. One, I probably haven't been as thorough in searching as I could be. So I'll say that. Certainly, like, plenty of blame is on me. I'm a little bit lazy. It's funny, like, I'm not a lazy person in the least, but there are certainly things in my life that I'm extremely lazy about. And I will lazily fund one of my films, mostly on my own line of credit, with a few private investors before actually just like Google searching for, I don't know, angel institutions somewhere or grant programs, which maybe I should do. But then I'd reach the application and be like, oh, it's so much easier just to sign up for a credit card, which is just horrible of me. But regardless, I don't think I'm wrong in saying that countries like Australia, pretty much any European country, Canada, even South Korea, those countries and plenty more are infinitely better at supporting the arts than America is. In fact, I think America is pretty terrible at supporting the arts, or at least governmentally so. And we're a hyper capitalist society, and that's like what we value here. And I think that we would benefit from supporting the arts more with government grants and government programs akin to like those that we see in some of the countries that I just named, and I'm sure more. I would love to see that. This isn't me complaining for myself. If anything, this is me complaining for some of my brilliant friends who do struggle. They struggle emotionally and mentally, but there's just because of I don't know. I don't want to plumb their lives, but they're like brilliant people who are still like mercurial, shall we say. And I wish that we could support them better, give them more money to create their art, which would then enrich, not just American lives, but global lives. Because, uh, earning
So
a
there's
good
not
living.
some well-known fund or well-known body, a government body that you can go to. We have, wonderful institutions like Screen Australia, which is the national body, and each state has their own state film department where you can go to. You might not be successful, but there is money there, there is finance there for you. If you meet certain targets and hit certain marks, you can apply and get some finance. There's nothing that really comes to mind to you as an American filmmaker that the government offers anywhere, even on a state level.
Not governmentally. If one exists, then I don't know it. Um, the only way that and it's funny, like what you just mentioned, institutions like the one that you just mentioned, I will see names of institutions like that in front of so many foreign films, or I should just say, internet films that are international to us. Like this production made possible with the generous contributions of fill in your, whatever country, state artistic program. And as far as I know, we don't have those sorts of things here. I know that privately, they probably exist more. It's funny. I was just zooming with somebody the other day who was talking about, some of her artist friends, like dancers, sculptors, theater people who are given grant money by programs that support dancing or theater or stuff like that. And I'm sure stuff like that exists that I just haven't researched. But no, governmentally, we are more focused on capital.
Does that situation necessarily make you hyper conscious of returning any investment that you get, of actually gearing your film to at least make some money.
Yes, I mean, and this is a little bit like what you asked earlier. I wanted to make something more commercial, not just for myself to be noticed and hired for an even bigger film after this, but really so that I could more likely return investor dollars. Some people on this film invested notable sums, and from $1 they'll be repaid. Like they will be paid absolutely first. And my distributor is a good distributor. And so I think that they will be repaid. No matter what, like I feel that if somebody gives me $1 on my film, I feel extreme pressure to return that dollar. Now, whether or not I always can, it's difficult. These films, I don't mind saying that, like. My first two films have not profited, though, like they've done fine, but they haven't profited yet. And I hope that this one, starts to profit certainly faster than these other two are headed there. Because like on all three of my films, I have wanted nothing more. Like if anything, like if the film succeeded in no other way, I would hope that it at least succeeded in repaying the investors, which hasn't quite been the case, because the number one investor in all my films is always, or so far, has always been me. They have not repaid me, that is for sure. So that's actually if anything, my number one goal, just because people were so kind to give me the money, to make the film, with a certain expectation, hopefully that they earn it back. If anything, the only thing I ever want from any of my films is really just to earn the money back so that I can repay them. And thank them as thoroughly as I can. Not just thank them with words, but thank them with reimbursement for allowing me to take an idea in my head and put it out in the world. When people are privately investing and those people personally and their friends, you are highly incentivized to try to return that money.
Just to cover some biographical material, but just firstly, what do you shoot on?
Okay, so I'll answer for all three of my films, actually. The first, so Breast Picture, we shot, oh gosh, now I can't quite remember the exact camera. Maybe it was called like HVX or something like that. It was a fine camera, but I'm sure you noticed, like Breast
Picture. Sounds like a Sony.
Gosh, actually, I now need to text I shouldn't have said I so confidently said I'll answer for all three films, but really I'm just going to answer for the second two because I can't quite remember the first one now. My cinematographer would remember. Obviously, it didn't look as good as The Worst Year of My Life, or I don't think it looks as good as The Worst Year of My Life or Batsh Bride. And that's because, we were using older equipment, but we did the best that we could at the time. What's funny is The Worst Year of My Life and Batsh Bride, we shot on the same camera. Even though those films are, I think, 4 years apart. They're dated 4 years apart. We shot them both on the Canon 5D, which I actually think is a fantastic camera. I only have one problem with it, which I think is that I think it's called progressive scan. You know how like old cathode ray televisions would project an image like that, like line by line. Yep. So technically, it's not a flat projection like that every frame. It's like blah, 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 blah. I think the Canon 5D records the same way. And so if you start to shoot handheld or move the camera too much, you'll notice that like the top of the frame moves a little bit before the bottom of the frame because of that progressive scan, which can result in jello cam if you steady cam afterwards. So that's like my one complaint about it. But the camera was so very much controlled. But that was more of an issue on The Worst Year of My Life where I did handhold more and everything. On Batsh Bride, the camera was so controlled with like steady movements or just locked off shots or like easy pans or or not super fast pans or super fast or pans that are so fast that it doesn't matter. So it worked out fine there. What I love about the camera is Canon is just great, period. But that camera, great camera, and then if you have a good lens package, it's I think just a top-notch camera that can parallel some of the better cameras out there, and with some good post-production work, look just about as good as any other film that you see. And both on Worst Year and on Batshit Bride, our lens package was very good. Although my cinematographer on Batshit Bride laughed at me for how much I used our 85 millimeter lens, which has like a shallow depth of focus, which I like a lot. To a point where like there was one point where actually like after a location move, we were running out of sun, and I was actually late to arrive at the location for like whatever reason. I can't remember exactly. So they just started shooting the scene without me. And I walked up, it's like, are they shooting a scene without me? And and my cinematographer was like, hey, yeah, I mean, like, we just figured we should probably start now. And sorry, but at the same time, I just popped an 85 millimeter lens and set up this shot. What do you think? I'm like, I looked in the camera, like, yeah, that's probably what I would have done.
Now, mate, just quickly, how old are you?
Oh, I just recently turned 38 years old.
Congratulations. And
Thank
just
you.
tell us, again, in a nutshell, just a bit about your background and how you got into filmmaking. You mentioned your comedy work in LA earlier. Just give us your life story in 2 minutes.
I will do the best I can. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, but I grew up when I was in Alabama with my family. I grew up mostly in Mobile, Alabama, with a quick jaunt to New Orleans because my dad, he's a doctor, and I think his residency was in New Orleans. So my first childhood memories are actually of New Orleans. And then, however old you are, in second grade, we moved to Florida, Sarasota, Florida, technically Nokomis. And I grew up there until I graduated from high school. After high school, I went to Yale University, spent 4 years there, graduated, moved to
Studied
Las
what?
Vegas. I studied film, which I always say is studying film studies at Yale University is like ordering a cheeseburger at a Michelin star restaurant. Um, but still, like film is what I love, so that's what I majored in, and it fit me. And then I moved to Los Angeles afterwards. Obviously, studied and then performed a lot of comedy. Meanwhile, making my first two films out there. After I finished my second film, I was absolutely sick of that town, and so I just pretty much up and left. I shot my final scene, and within like a month or so, I was out of there because I was like, I can edit this film anywhere, and I just need to leave. There's more to that story, but that's the simple version of it. And then I moved to the East Coast, and I ended up working at Blue Sky Studios. And I finished my second film while at Blue Sky Studios, and then I shot Batshit Bride while still working there. Took 2 weeks of vacation and went and made this film. And then
Did your work as an independent filmmaker help you get the job at Blue Sky? Did it have anything to do with it at all?
Yeah, certainly. It was funny. So I interviewed there, and obviously my resume includes my films. And so, like, I interviewed with directors, like established directors at Blue Sky Studios, who had directed, like some of the Ice Age films, or Epic, or Horton Hears a Who, and other films that have done well that are big studio hits. And they're animate, but they've always been animation directors. So like some of my interviews with them, like they started asking me more questions about like, so what's it like to shoot live action? And it turned into like an interview of me, and I was like, oh, that's kind of funny. And like I never valued my resume much, but they're like, this is a really cool resume. And I was like, thanks. I've never thought much about it. I always thought I underachieved. But they were really fascinated as animation directors who have never worked in live action. So that was interesting. I remember I hadn't thought about that in a while. So thanks for asking.
Okay. And so you would have had, when you applied at Blue Sky, you would have had what, Breast Picture and Worst Year under your belt?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Breast Picture, obviously a pretty funny film about a porno director who wants to make a legit film,
Yes.
but does it within the guise of making a porn film, so he can get away with his with his producer,
Yeah.
his porno producer.
Yes.
Again,
Yes.
it sounds like a Seth Rogen, Kevin Smith type movie.
Absolutely. And gladly so. In fact, it's funny, like, obviously Seth Rogen ended up making Seth and Miri make a porno, which is like the opposite idea of two everyday people who make a pornography. Where I was trying to do like everyday pornographers doing Oscar-worthy drama. So it was like opposite directions for both films.
Yeah, no, it was. I thought it was actually very, very funny.
Thank
Again,
you.
you can't help but see that it's a low budget film, but you had
Yes.
very committed actors on that film, and again, the idea was very strong. I hope one day that you do get to remake it with
That's what.
Worst Year of My Life, which is basically going through a guy going through a breakup. I got to tell you, mate, I've got a couple of issues with it, but
That's fine.
overall, it's a very, very heartfelt, poignant, touching, sometimes painful film to watch. Was that from experience or from a lot of deep conversations with friends who had gone through breakups?
So I mean, I have been through terrible breakups, absolutely. Um, and so like obviously like I was thinking of terrible breakups when I wrote that film because I wanted to make a film. Uh, my entire goal for that film, in all my films, I always have like a singular goal for each of them. And I always say I make my films for one person out there, and I always hope that I can meet that one person that I made it for. And fortunately, on all three of my films, I have met that one person. And you know, like I make them for more people than that. But Worst Year was one where it's like I want to make a film that is super raw and just about painful breakups. And I want this film to exist out there for other people who go through a painful breakup and feel these feelings and don't quite understand them, and maybe you know in the moment feel alone in these feelings, like these mixtures, these feelings that are like a mix of like extreme love and also extreme hate, but I don't mean the hate, but also I wanted anybody who watches this film to know, oh, I'm not alone in feeling these things. So absolutely, I was thinking of my own real life experiences and terrible breakups. Plenty of other stories that people have told me about their terrible breakups, which was helpful because it only reaffirmed what I thought, which is like we're not alone in this sort of thing. And I think, you know, I think everybody in the stupidity of one's 20s usually experiences at least one relationship that is, if not as bad, close to as bad and as rocky as the one in that film. But I mean, at the same time, you saw the film, and there's like comedy sketches, or there's scenes that are like fantasy sequences and comedy sketches and stuff like that. So none of that is like, I mean, that's all fantasy. So that's like all invented and all that stuff. Um, so, and I did that because, you know, I'm a comedian, and also I'll frankly say I wanted to rip off Annie Hall because it's one of so I was like, ooh, I want to do something like Annie Hall, which I think every independent filmmaker does at some point, rip off Annie Hall. So yeah. And I did. I remember like at a festival, I met some guy who walked up to me. He's like, oh my gosh, like I've been through a relationship like that, and like that was like just so spot on. I was like, thank you. You are the one person you're the person out there in the world that I made this for.
Well, I got to
So
say, one
yeah.
of the things that you nailed in that film is that feeling of the floor being removed from under your feet, of
Yeah.
basically falling into this abyss that at one moment you have what you think is the most important and precious thing in your life, and then in one jolt, it's gone, and you're at the bottom of this abyss, and you still have feelings for this person. You still love this person despite all the evidence in front of you that says you should not feel anything but absolute hatred and a lust for vengeance against this person. You should be planning their murder, not
Yes.
helping them out, as this
It's a
guy
weird
does.
feeling.
It's a brilliant capturing of that completely irrational emotion.
Thank you. And that's exactly what it is. It's irrational and it's really, really weird. But I think it's also a really, really true feeling that's pretty much the exact feeling that I wanted to capture in that whole film, and just let people out there know who do see the film, you are not alone in feeling that. And it's a natural feeling. And I don't know the cure for it, but at least know that you're not alone.
You know what my main issue with that film is, though, is that in those comedy sequences,
Yeah.
there's a western sequences, there's the dating game thing. When you do that, you are taking the viewer out of the film a little bit, because you've got the actors
Mhm.
basically playing in this fantasy sequence, and it kind of highlights the artifice of it. We know that it's artifice because it's a film, but you are kind of breaking one of the walls. You are sort of shattering the illusion a bit. I would I would argue that if you actually went back and took those scenes out, the dating game scene especially, if you took them out and just ran it as a drama, it would probably work even better. I forgave it because it's a low budget film, and I thought, oh yeah, it's his second movie or it's his second film, so he probably might have thought better having done that. But I would have cut them out. What do you reckon?
I think you're probably absolutely right. If anything, those scenes are testament to the fact that I cannot make Annie Hall. I can make the worst year of my life.
Not yet, anyway.
Yeah, maybe hopefully sometime soon. I think you're absolutely right. I might even just do that. I'm not going to re-release that film or anything, but I would maybe even just do that for fun. Like if I am now quarantined. We're all quarantined, so maybe I'll just do that, the next week or something as like a hobby and see how it looks.
But I got to say that aside, I thought the performances were great, and you obviously wrote the hell out of the screenplay. I imagine you went over that a lot.
I did, yeah. And what's funny about that one is that was another thing with that screenplay is I mentioned already how much of a structure hound I am. On that one, I was like, you know what, I'm going to start this one in a completely different way. Eventually, it'll be structured, but I started it in a completely different way, which is I just wrote tons and tons of monologues and tons of just like arbitrary scenes. And I remember, I think like my first document for that film was just like 200 pages of just, I think it was like, yeah, I can't remember, maybe 200 final draft pages or 200, I don't think it was 200 word pages, 200 final draft pages of just random stuff that I was writing, mostly monologues, some random scenes here and there. And then eventually I started to pare that down and shape it into a screenplay. A screenplay that still follows very traditional structure, even though it's completely nonlinear. And the other thing is the rewrite didn't just stop in the script. I actually re-edited a ton of sequences in that film in the editing room. All my films, like the first cut is always, my scripts have always been like 95, 96 pages for the films, and then the first cut is commensurate with that, usually like 95, 96 minutes. And then I go, and I'm actually really ruthless in the editing room. I don't have any darlings. The only time I ever have a darling is when I just don't know the solution to cut something. I can tell a good story about Batsh, actually, in that regard. When I just can't think of like what the correct solution is. It's not because I'm married to me. It's just like, I don't know how to cut this material. I don't know where the cut is. And worst year, like, the first cut was long. It was a little bit, not languorous, because languorous is actually a positive connotation, but it was a little bit slow. And so I went in and I like shaved the hell out of it, and I started moving scenes to different areas, and like one entire scene was just like reduced to like 2 or 3 shots. I completely like rewrote like one solid sequence in there, and I'm really proud of that sequence, the way that I rewrote it in the editing room. But that was the beauty of like a nonlinear film, is you can do that.
Mate, I'm sorry, you've teased me, and I've got to know, even if it's just brief, what was the bit in Batshit Bride that you couldn't nut?
So it was funny. So I have a producer on this film who, she's somebody I work with at Blue Sky Studios. And her...
Who was that?
Her name is Erica Pulcini.
Okay.
So Erica A. Pulcini is how she's credited. Erica Pulcini. She's wonderful. Her story sense, her creative sense is really, really good and really, really sharp. And I wish that I really actually wish that she would write more, because she's just so sharp at recognizing good moves or things to change, or like this isn't working. And so on Batshit Bride, if you remember, there's like the whole third act where Heather is going to, in the dead of night, going to improve this other girl's wedding, right? And it cuts to her and like her whole cadre of helpers marching up the steps to this clubhouse where the wedding reception is going to be. And she marches in, and to her surprise, the other bride's mother is sleeping in there guarding the area, because she knows that Heather's going to come change it up if she doesn't guard, right? But the mother's asleep. And there was a whole scene in there where Heather's like, we don't want to wake this woman. She's like me, but worse. And then there's like a whole like it's actually like an Indiana Jones parody where there's like they're sneaking in and there's booby traps and everything as they're all because the mother has set up booby traps to stop them. And there's like, traditional rule of threes. There's 3 beats of it. And it was a whole scene. And I liked it. I thought it was a really funny scene, and there's some cool camera moves in there and everything. But Erica didn't like it, and I was like, well, all right. I mean, I'm happy to try cutting it. She mostly didn't like the last beat, and I was like, well, all right, I'll try cutting it. But then it's just like it's only 2 beats, and it's that just feels weird. It feels like it's missing a 3rd beat. I tried and tried and tried. And I was like, I can't find the edit for this. Like, it's going to stay in there. And then one day I was like in the shower in the morning, and I was like, wait, what if I cut it right here after she says that line? And I went and tried it, and suddenly it worked great. And like, I was happy to throw away the scene after that, even though it was a lot of work to shoot. And I also did think it was a funny scene, but like, once I thought of the edit, I was like, oh, perfect. And then she was right. Like I cut it. I was like, God, that's great. This 3rd act moves a lot more smoother now than it was moving before. And so yeah, once I figured out where the cut was, it was a great cut. I just couldn't find it at first. So anyway, that's
just 2 wind-up questions for you. Worst Year of My Life is dedicated to 2 people in memory of.
Yes.
Can you just tell me who those people are?
They're my grandparents, if I remember correctly. Is that? And I just have to remember now if I dedicated Best Picture to anybody, and if I dedicated Batch Bride.
Best Picture. I don't think you did, but Worst Year of My Life you did. So what were the names again? And they were just your grandparents.
Yeah. So the Worst Year of My Life is dedicated to my 2 grandparents, Curtis and Sonia Smith, and they're my paternal grandparents. They were fantastic, just wonderful grandparents. And also, when my grandfather died, he left some money to his grandchildren, and that money went towards the Worst Year of My Life. And so, I would have dedicated it to both of them anyway, because I can't remember exactly in relation to the film when it happened, but they had passed recently. And I'm sure that, like, as long as I continue to make films, if somebody meaningful in my life has passed since in the time that I was making the film, I will dedicate it to that person. So it's dedicated to them, so that their memory lives on in some small way, and as a thank you. And the only reason I couldn't quite remember is Batshit Bride. I very, very, very much thank my parents. My parents are still alive, but I very much thank my parents in that film. So I had to like suddenly remember what credits were where.
Vile Henchman, where'd you get that name?
So Vile Henchman is an old improv group of mine in Los Angeles. And I know, like, for a production company, it's maybe a funny thing to see at the start of a film with 2 like such strong words. It's not something like, Lake House or, like Rosebud, some like generic
Golden
like
Petal Pictures.
Yeah, exactly. Like those are all like, easily digestible. Instead, it's just like Vile Henchman, which is a very strong name. But it was an improv group of mine in Los Angeles, 3-person group. And, we were a pretty successful group for a little while, and then we all just kind of went our separate ways. But it was really the group where like my understanding of, what understanding I may have, my understanding of comedy really congealed and solidified when I was performing in that group. And I also always just liked the name Vile Henchman. And the absolute origin of the name is the Carmen Sandiego games. They had a Vile Henchman, and it was like V.I.L.E. And it would be like, like a little thing would pop up on your screen and say like Vile Henchman detected. So I changed it to Vile without the, I guess making it look like it's an acronym, without the periods, and changed it to plural, so it's all, not a copyright issue.
Just quickly, can you recall the budgets on Worst Year and Best Picture?
Absolutely. So Breast Picture we shot for under $35,000.
Wow.
Also 2 weeks. Yeah, also over 2 weeks. And then The Worst Year of My Life we shot for under $15,000. And that was the one that one. The shoot for that one was a little bit different. That one we shot 9 days straight, and then subsequent weekends afterwards. Even like some scenes we shot like 3 months after that main 9 days of shooting. But both of those films, I mean, Worst Year, under $15,000. That's pretty crazy. But we did it, and both of those films have cost a lot more in post production. But like I said, I always just like to say what I shot them for, because that is a number that ends. It's like, all right, I'm done shooting. This is how much it costs to do this, and I could theoretically not spend any more.
What is the experience to you of making these films? I mean, are you getting high on the adrenaline rush of having to get this thing done in a short amount of time? And is it a thrill? Is it euphoric to do it? Or is it just a huge pain in the bum?
All of the above is definitely the best answer. And it varies from moment to moment. And even so far, after 3 films, I can say film to film. I will preface before I answer the question by saying, like, if there's anything that I know, having grown up, having been a child, having been a young adult, I know that, like, this is just the thing that I do. It's what I was put on the planet to do, whether other people want me to do it or not. This is the thing that I love. If there's any proof of it, it's, like in quarantine, what have I reverted to doing? Watching just all the films that I grew up loving, rewatching them on Amazon or whatever, or on DVD or something like that. And watching like cinephile videos on YouTube. It's just what I do.
I imagine it
And
sounds
so
like you're a huge Woody Allen fan.
Oh, I am. I mean, my joke is, I'm a huge fan. Never seen any of his films. Are they good? Which is a horrible, horrible, tasteless joke. But I always just I know how people feel about him personally, and I always say that when I am his fan, I am not thinking about that sort of stuff. I'm only thinking about his filmography and what he has done as a filmmaker, and his career as a filmmaker, and I envy it highly. Because he's been able to make films that he loves, that are so many of them genius, undeniably so, and he's been able to make them on his own terms.
And one a year.
And 1 year, and they're both, and so many of them are both hilarious, but then also meaningful and powerful and emotional.
Jonathan, I was surprised I found so little of you online. I couldn't find anything on YouTube. I found your channel with your
Yes.
comedy skits, and that's all very funny. But I couldn't find an interview or a little red carpet thing or anything. Did I miss something?
No, you did not. There's a few reasons behind it. One, obviously, my name. There's so many people with my name. So there's that, and then also I do try not to be online.
Oh?
It's funny. Like, somebody asked me recently. I was zooming with somebody. I'm working on a lot of projects right now, and I was zooming with somebody who would maybe help with funding on my latest thing. And she was asking me, like, do you want, like, is part of the reason that you do this for fame or anything like that? And I was like, gosh, how do I answer this question? No, like, I don't want to be out there. I don't want to be. I'm happy to. And also, this is not to say I'm more than happy to interview with you right now. Absolutely. But generally speaking, I don't want to be out there. I don't want to be like. I don't want people to know my life or anything like that. Everything that I've shared, I've been happy to share with you. But, like, I don't want to be like Brad Pitt or Tom Cruise or Jennifer Aniston or something like that.
You don't want to be on Facebook or Twitter or anything like that. You don't want to be tweeting every 10 minutes about what you just did, about the cup of coffee you just had, or about the TV commercial you just watched.
No, I'm not that type of person. I'm not a huge fan of social media in the least. In fact, I mean, like I pointed out, one of the satirical elements in Batsh Bride is a criticism of social media and how it motivates people to do certain things in their lives. which should be meaningful for other reasons, for the actual reasons that these things were created, like the institution of marriage. So I don't like that. I also, I just don't really want to be out there. It's funny though, like, but I was at the same time, I was saying like, but I do want people to know my work and like think that it's good, so that it will lead to more work. And I was like, in this long-winded way, she goes like, oh, you don't want fame, but you do want recognition. I was like, yes, that's a good way to put it. I do want people to recognize my name as somebody who can make a film, so that they'll continue to give me money to make more. But that's it. I wanted to stop there.
Okay.
So,
well, I was asking that question just as a like a wind-up thing, but I think I might just include that. Now, mate, again, thank you very, very much for your time. It'll give me just a couple of days just to edit this thing down. When I say edit, it basically means editing my side. So making my rambling, semi-coherent questions sound much more intelligent than they actually were. So, that'll be the only real editing there. And again, my fingers crossed that all the technology has been on my side this morning, because it was not a good start. And again, I apologize for the delay.
That is A-okay. And again, I recorded it, so I will share the file with you. I think between the 3 files, you'll probably be okay.
Well, I hope so too. Mate, if you saw the setup I've got here, the way I'm recording the audio and all the rest of it, you would laugh your head off. But I will spare you that, and I will bid you a pleasant evening. And thank you again so much, Jonathan. I know that we've been yapping about doing this for a while. I'm glad I finally pulled it off. I'll put this up on my website, jimshelby.com. I will, of course, send you the link, and it'll also, of course, be up on YouTube. So this will be the first comprehensive Jonathan Smith interview on YouTube. So when you hit the studios, don't forget.
I'll point them right to this one. Like this is ground zero for knowing at all who I am.
Mate, thank you again very much.